floor is yours.
Thank you. Comrades, nationalism. This is something I've been wanting to discuss for a while now, because I don't think that many people actually understand what nationalism is. A lot of people get nationalism and socialism mixed up. They think it's much the same thing, but they're two entirely different entities. So, and the Labour Party in particular do not have a clue what either of these things are. So what is nationalism? Where did it originate? Well, nationalism comes from the political, social and cultural history of any particular nation. Nationalism in Scotland is different from the nationalism in England. Now I did an article and this should be on the website, which explains why Scotland and England are different. But I'll go into it in a wee bit of detail here. But what exactly is nationalism? Well, nationalism is a feeling of community, a feeling of loyalty to a certain community. How did it originate? Well, when humans first stood up on their two legs, they had to herd together for protection and for comfort, like other species of animals, fish and birds. So when they herded together, they then started to form communes, which meant they had to organise. And so from there they had to develop some kind of language so that they could organise, they had to communicate, they had to work together. So they became communes. And these communes evolved into tribes. They never had the tribal system. So the tribes had their own individual language, their own individual culture, and their own individual identity. The tribal system was a brutal system, a warrior type system. It wasn't like you maybe see on the TV, you know, where everything's peaceful and all that. It wasn't like that. It was very brutal at times. And so they had to be very, very loyal to the community, to each other, and they had to be like virtually like a family in order to protect themselves and to organise and to evolve. And else they would just withered away. Some tribes did. But the bigger tribes, or the more intelligent tribes, because once humans had discovered fire, then they were able to cook meat, which meant they could, the meat was easier to digest, and so they got more protein to the brain. So some tribes or groups developed a lot quicker than others. So the ones that didn't develop just faded away by the wayside, you know, whatever happened to them. The larger tribes certainly, they would take over smaller tribes, usually in brutal fashion, and so some tribes would become a lot bigger. And then these tribes would band together and form a small nation, and the small nations would band together and form a bigger nation. But what remained the same was the loyalty for the tribal system. So anyway, the tribes evolved into nations, and the loyalty that the tribal system still had remained within the nation system, and so that became nationalism. People were loyal to the nation state, as opposed to the tribe. The tribalism in England was wiped out 2,000 years ago by the Romans. They just destroyed it, and England and Wales became slave nations instead of tribal nations. But in Scotland, tribalism survived up until the end of the 18th century, until after Culloden, where the warrior elite, the Jacobites, were heavily defeated by the English, or by the Redcoats, I should say. It wasn't actually the English, the Redcoats. And at the same time, the Highland clearances were happening, so people were getting thrown out their crofts. The people of the clans are only tribes, and the people for the clans were getting thrown out their crofts to find their own way, to try and survive on their own. Many of them came down to the Central Belt. Some of them went to America and Canada, etc. But most of them came down to the Central Belt to try and find a living, to try and find accommodation, to try and survive. So they brought with them that same sense of loyalty to their community. And if you look at Glasgow in particular, there is still that real sense of community, that communality that existed within the tribal system. Now, nationalism and socialism, as I said earlier, are two completely different entities. And it's like comparing apples with carpet tags. Socialism is a scientifically worked out method of production and wealth distribution, whereas nationalism, as I said earlier, is a feeling of communality within a nation. And the parameters of nationalism are the borders of that particular nation. So anything within these parameters, any politics, it could be anything. Whereas socialism, the parameters for socialism is within the classes, the working class, the middle classes, and the ruling class. Now, the class system is the same right throughout the world. So socialism is international. But you can have socialism within a nation, and you can have nationalism within a class. So nationalism can accommodate both right-wing and left-wing politics. You can see it right through Europe. There's some of them, like Ukraine for instance, which is quite extremely right-wing. But then you look at Scotland, which is a radical nationalism. And as I say, it's all based on the history of Scotland's politics, society, and its culture. Socialism does not recognise borders, but whereas nationalism does. So when the Labour Party started to call us Nats and cyber Nats and super Nats, whatever they want to call us, they've got absolutely no idea what nationalism is, and they didn't have a clue what socialism is either. They don't recognise that there is a class system. Now, Jeremy Corbyn, for all he's a socialist, he is also an English nationalist because he's influenced by English nationalism. He can't help it. Maybe he doesn't even understand it, but he can't help it. And that is why Jeremy Corbyn will never agree to Scotland getting a second referendum. He would never agree to it. It doesn't matter if the Tories get voted out of power in Westminster and Jeremy Corbyn gets voted in, he would still be opposed to it because he's heavily influenced by English nationalism. But in Scotland, there's a real problem as well because people tend to ridicule at times. I've seen it on demonstrations. People laugh at a lot of people who concentrate on the cultural aspect of Scotland's history. And they'll dress accordingly to show their commitment to Scotland and to show their pride in Scotland. And people laugh at them. And I think that's a dangerous road to go down because when you start ridiculing and laughing at people because of the way they dress, because of what they believe in, then that's heading down towards fascism. We saw it in Germany in the mid-30s when the Nazis started to ridicule the way Jews walked, the way they dressed, the way they talked, how they looked. First of all, they ridiculed them and then they started physically attacking them. And of course it came to the really serious stuff with the ultimate crime in the last century. So it is a serious road to go down when you start ridiculing a nation's culture or people who celebrate a nation's culture. There's no reason for socialists to get involved in that kind of discussion even, certainly not that kind of behaviour. We have to concentrate on the politics. Let other people concentrate on the culture, we concentrate on the politics of Scotland. And the way to achieve our political aspirations is through unity of purpose. Discuss with other people of similar mind that want independence, so we learn more about them, they can learn more about us, and we can celebrate our communal history, and we can celebrate the fact that each and every one of us are Scottish nationalists.